Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
This is Ashley Baker, the Director of Education for SBCA, and I will be your host for this episode of the Component Connection. I am joined by Todd Tomalak, the Principal of Building Products and Remodeling at Zonda. And we are going to talk all things economic forecasts at BCMC, which of course is happening this fall in Columbus, Ohio. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, so nice to join you, Ashley. Thank you. Excited to see everyone at BCMC.
Yeah, well, we are really excited to have you. You have joined us previously. It's always a wonderful forecast. So we're glad that we've got you back for another year.
I feel like every time I've come to BCMC, it's been like at the moment when like the season was changing in something within housing and the economy. And so here, look at all the things that are happening right now. So yeah, such good timing and exciting times for us to go through. Hopefully things get easier before we get there.
Right? We can only hope. But at least we've got somebody at the helm who is going to give us all the insights. Can't imagine anybody else coming in and sharing all the things with us when there is so much, just it's a crazy world out there. Well, let's start kind of big picture. If you had to describe the current economic environment in a sentence or two, which I know is tough, but thinking about it with kind of that component manufacturing industry lens, what would you say?
So one of my favorite quotes from Ray Bradbury is there's a quote that he did from Dandelion Wine, which is just a fantastic piece of work.
Yeah.
And it's the whole story is all about change. And kind of the theme was like, people are usually not ready for change. This boy's at the point of his life when he's not quite ready for manhood and other people are going through. And so there's this kind of classic phrase in Dandelion Wine where he talks about seeing the apples begin to drop. And first you have one apple drop and then two and then 7 and 9. And then all of a sudden you're at the point when the whole season's changed. And so my message to your BCMC group would be, we're starting to see apples begin to fall, changes beginning to happen. Now, it doesn't mean the season's changed yet. That's ahead. But we're just at that point where a few of the indicators are moving differently now than maybe what we've seen over the last 24 or 36 months. And it takes time to flow into the business, but we should definitely continue to see it accelerate by the time we get to this fall.
I think sometimes when those apples fall and people think, they shrivel up and they drop, and it's not necessarily a good thing, but that's the rebirth, right? That natural cycle. So are we trending good in that regard?
Yeah, there's a little bit of evidence. So let's maybe talk about the things that give us pause right now, just to be so the housing market kind of broadly is quite slow, and we're seeing a lot of builders express caution, both on single family and multifamily, although multifamily starts have been doing better, I think, than some had hoped or that had worried. So we have that happen. And then we have this incremental conflict that has emerged. And really, we've seen a wave of price increases announced across the board, which is really, really tricky to try to navigate if you're a manufacturer or supplier, because none of the builders will accept price increases. And you're dealing with a situation where consumers have significantly less wallet, less purchasing power. Like there are a few points in history you can point to where purchasing power has shifted as quickly as what we've seen for some of the home buyer segments that we have now. And then that's reflected in consumer sentiment, which, depending on what measure you look at, is lower than it's ever been in some pieces of data. The period that's most similar right now in terms of like going out and moving and buying a home appears to be how consumers felt in the early 80s. When mortgage rates went from 9 to 18% overnight. And then there was like this period right after that happened when the shock kind of wore off. And then they had to figure out, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to move out? I don't like my roommate anymore. Things are probably expensive. And then as the dust began to clear, we started seeing some people begin to move. And it feels a little bit like that, like the summer of maybe 1982 or so. A few years to go, but when it turned to turn quick.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I can definitely attest to feeling the impact in my wallet. So I'm sure they're looking at that very closely. I think one of the indicators or something that our industry looks at pretty closely, of course, would be interest rates. I think they continue to dominate a lot of that economic conversations. What are you seeing right now in terms of how rates are influencing housing demand and construction activity?
Yeah, a few different stories are developing. So, from the 30,000 foot level, long-term interest rates like the 10-year treasury, which drives mortgage rates, and by extension, the 30-year mortgage rate they started out the year pretty good in the low sixes. We thought maybe 6% would be possible. It's jumped up considerably since then, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, beyond that. Most of that is due to concerns regarding what's happening with the fiscal situation and the current conflict. At the same time, some of the other interest rates, think of like the rates that you'd go get for like a home equity line of credit, they've come down a ton. Yeah. So what we're seeing is like the financial plumbing that drives spending on housing. So here's a statistic for you. There's only a few times in history when we've seen the rate decline as fast as we've seen right now for HELOC year over year. And it's below historic norms, and the amount of dollar volume that's expanding on a HELOC is expanding. Like that's three kind of the recipe for credit creation and home equity lines of credit. We really didn't see much of that happen until you get to like pre-2004, happened some in the 90s. It's happening right now. So that's pretty unique. The consensus on Wall Street right now is that we're going to see higher for longer for long-term rates, and maybe short-term rates move around a little bit depending on who's at the helm of the Fed. But I just brought this up at our Builder 100 conference. There's some interesting pieces of arguments that suggest that depending on what progresses with AI, there's a new paper that dropped like a week ago. Really, really, really well done. Think of like, the equivalent of like a Michael Jordan, if it was, but for economics, writing about the effect of AI productivity on long-term rates. And the case is being put out there that, I don't know what AI productivity numbers will happen. I've seen some people throw out numbers of like, 1 or 2%. But this paper suggested that even if we saw like any productivity improvement, like 1/10 of a point or 2/10 of a point, which seems consensus, that we eventually will see, think of like 2030, long-term, including mortgage rates, come down by like a point or a point and a half.
Oh, wow.
Holy cow. Yeah, that was my reaction. Like,
Huge.
Holy cow, unpriced in for sure. So we're still digging on that, but I think the answer is the debate is out, but I would take the over in terms of like upside trajectory for the housing market based on some of the things we're seeing now versus maybe what we thought 6 months ago.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit more. You were just at the Builder 100 event. How was that?
It was exceptional. There's obviously a lot of caution around housing in general, but we still see 5 million home transactions happening in a year between resale homes and new. So people are still moving. It's just a question of like how many are buying new homes and capturing some of that. And it felt a little bit more candid and optimistic at the end of it. So maybe that's a good nugget to capture the kind of how the industry is beginning to feel that there's parts of the market now. I'll pick on resale housing where, for the last 3 years or so, existing home sales was basically dead. 4 million, just didn't move at all. Didn't matter what happened with interest rates. Didn't matter what happened in the economy. And then like in the last 6 months, all of a sudden we're seeing it in the 4.1, 4.2, 4.3. There's a case that we probably should be closer to 4.2 this spring, depending on how you measure it. Just improvement. It was dead for 3 years and now it's beginning to move. That has to matter. So I think there's a little bit more clarity happening now and a little bit more where we see the path. It's just a question of being careful about how to kind of deploy the business.
Right. Well, that makes sense. You and I had a chance to touch base, obviously prior to our podcast here. You mentioned at the Builder 100 event that there are 7 things that were of significance that you shared. And can you elaborate a little bit more on what those are, what you were hoping to get across?
Yeah. So you'll probably hear more of that as what I try to do is we're always doing research and we're learning new things and we're discovering things. And we try to identify, what are the indicators or things that we're uncovering that matter a whole lot for the future business, but are not showing yet up in your numbers, but will soon. So they're not priced in yet. So one of those has to do with what's happening with this current Iran conflict and kind of the upstream economics of just how do you get products manufactured, created, supplied, If you transport them, you have to transport them on rubber, which requires oil, right? And so do all the upstream components. So the main thing is upstream economics are beginning to reset, and it's very duration sensitive. This initial wave of price increases that we've seen, they have not yet accounted for what happens if we get to say past August or September, and there's still some of these issues going on. So that's one. We're seeing a shift. We're seeing a shift among where e-commerce sits, including like how pro contractors buy materials. Don't think of like consumers going online to Amazon, but like of a pro contractor going to an app and clicking like, I want a decking project and I'm going to refresh all my fasteners that come with it. That really has the potential to change kind of the balance of dollars as they flow through the ecosystem within housing and building products. And then I'll just share one more here. I think this is an underrated point, but there's a case to be made that if you look at how cyclical the old housing cycles used to be and the old home improvement cycles and how people used to spend when rates came up and down, but we think there's a shift that happened in cyclicality where basically people are transacting less often, more deliberately. And you can see it in the data. If that's the case, it changes very much all sorts of things about your business, including like your capital structure, but also like how you have to think about your going to market and other things like that too. So yeah, much is shifting.
We hope that it's shifting for the better. You know, that's what we want to see. So when it comes to BCMC, without, giving away anything, and of course, I've learned over the years that an economic forecast can change up to the day before the presentation, given, anything and everything that can happen. So provide us with, if you can, just as sort of a little snippet as to what you hope to cover and touch on for us at BCMC.
So I think at BCMC, I'll give your listeners a good sense of where the state of the economy and housing is. We have to anchor there. But then also we'll probably pull a thread on all the scary things that they've heard and where things are going to develop, we think, in the next few years ahead. And the idea being, I think that there's a case to be made that there are big pockets of opportunity and value, but you have to be pretty well positioned to understand like where they will emerge and how to get it. Think of how different the housing industry is now, say, versus 2013. Just how you'd even go about business and what part of the market you go after. Even geographies are different. So we've got a really crystal clear picture of what parts of the country are progressing, how that's shifting, even the types of homes that people want to live in and what they're buying. It's different than it was like last cycle. So they need to understand that.
It'll be really important for them to be there. Regional insight's always so exceptional. You do such a great job, providing us with.
I saw a map that shows, we do a ranking that shows like the conditions of the country, how the housing markets are doing regionally. And the irony was that I think if you drew a square around BCMC, all the markets around BCMC look pretty good. And then outside of there, they get progressively worse. So perhaps that's a sign that this is a great place to be and we'll have a great conversation.
Hey, I'm running with that. I like that explanation a lot. Well, we are really looking forward to you joining us at BCMC. We're excited to hear, what's ahead. And, we're glad that you're the one who's going to be delivering that information for us.
Can't wait to see everyone. And please, if you think of things that are interesting to think about between now and then, let me know. We'll be sure to work it in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Todd, for joining us today. And thank you all out there for listening to SBCA's podcast, Component Connection. If you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please like it and share it with others. Stay up to date and in the know by subscribing to Component Connection on whatever podcast platform you use most.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.